The text message came through at 8:47 p.m. on a Thursday evening, and I read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't mistaken. Sign those trust papers by Friday, or we're going to have a serious problem. You're 72 years old and you're not getting any sharper. Handle things before you end up in a nursing home with nothing. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I set my phone down on the kitchen counter, right next to my cup of chamomile tea, and I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. My son-in-law, Corey Hayes, had finally shown his true face. After 18 months of Sunday dinners, forced smiles, and questions about my finances disguised as concern, the mask had slipped completely. And he had no idea what he'd just done. See, there's something people don't understand about men like me. We were raised in a different time, a time when black men had to be 3 times as smart, 5 times as patient, and absolutely silent about our victories until they were already won. My late wife Dorothy, God rest her soul, used to say I was the quietest storm she'd ever known. 43 years of marriage, and that woman watched me dismantle problems without ever raising my voice. Corey Hayes thought he was dealing with a poor old widower who didn't understand trust documents and estate planning. He thought the modest 3-bedroom house in East Point, the 10-year-old Buick in the driveway, and my simple wardrobe meant I was scraping by on Social Security and whatever crumbs Dorothy left behind. He had no idea about the account, the private holding account at Meridian Trust and Fiduciary Services that contained exactly $12.7 million, carefully transferred there by Dorothy 6 months before her passing. Money from a tech patent licensing deal that my wife had negotiated back in 1987. Money that had been compounding quietly for decades. Money that was now entirely in my name and protected by layers of legal structure that would make any estate attorney weep with admiration. Corey thought he was playing chess with a man who didn't know the rules, but I'd already won the game before he sat down at the board. I picked up my phone again and typed a response, keeping my words simple and confused sounding. Corey, I don't understand. What papers are you talking about? Can we discuss this in person? I'm just a little overwhelmed with everything since Dorothy passed. 3 dots appeared immediately. He was typing. That's exactly what I'm talking about. You're overwhelmed. You're old. You need help. I'm trying to help you before you lose everything Dorothy worked for. Be grateful. Be grateful. I almost laughed out loud. This man, who I'd watched drain my daughter's savings account within 6 months of their wedding. This man, who drove a Range Rover while my Monique took the bus to her nursing job. This man, who had already convinced her to add his name to her checking account, her credit cards, and now he was coming for me. But he didn't know that I knew. He didn't know about the private investigator I'd hired 3 months ago, a meticulous woman named Priscilla Morton who specialized in financial predator cases. He didn't know about the forensic accountant who had already traced $17,000 of Monique's money into a private gambling account. He didn't know about the attorney who was preparing documents that would unravel his entire scheme. Most importantly, he didn't know about the trap I'd already set. Before we continue, shout out to Dwayne from Charlotte, North Carolina. We appreciate the love you show by commenting and sharing. The next morning, I was sitting in my living room when the doorbell rang. I knew it would be him before I even looked through the peephole. Corey always moved fast when he sensed resistance. He was wearing one of those expensive suits my daughter had paid for, his smile wide and his eyes cold. "Pops," he said, using the name I'd asked him not to call me. "Can I come in? I think we got off on the wrong foot last night." I stepped aside and let him enter, watching the way his eyes scanned my living room. I knew what he was calculating. The furniture was nice, but not extravagant. The television was a few years old. The decor was comfortable, not luxurious. Everything about my home said working-class retired widower, and I could see him relaxing, reassuring himself that his assessment was correct. "Would you like some coffee?" I asked, my voice soft. No. "I'm here to apologize," he said, settling onto my couch without invitation. That text was harsh. I was frustrated because I care about this family, and I don't want to see you struggle. You know Dorothy didn't leave you with much, and— "Didn't leave me with much?" I repeated, keeping my face neutral. Corey leaned forward. His hands clasped together like he was about to deliver bad news to a patient. I suppose in his mind, he was. "Pops, I've seen the financial summary. Monique showed me. The house has maybe 80,000 in equity. The savings account has about 40,000 left. Social Security covers the basics, but barely. That's not a legacy. That's survival." I said nothing. He took my silence as confirmation and continued, his voice dropping into that condescending tone men use when they think they're educating someone less intelligent. "Now, what I'm proposing is simple. We set up a family trust, pool the resources together. I have some investment opportunities that could triple that money in 5 years. But it only works if we act now, and if you sign over control to someone who understands these things." "Someone like you," I said. "Someone like me," he confirmed, smiling like he'd already won. "Look, you're old. I don't mean that disrespectfully, but it's a fact. You've worked hard your whole life. Dorothy worked hard, but neither of you knew how to make money work for you. I do. Let me help." I studied his face for a long moment. The arrogance there. The absolute certainty that he was the smartest person in the room. I thought about all the families he'd probably done this to before my daughter. I thought about all the people destroyed by men who looked exactly like him, talked exactly like him, smiled exactly like him. "And if I don't sign?" I asked quietly. Something flickered in his eyes. Something cold. "Then I'll have to have a conversation with Monique about whether it's healthy for her to keep enabling your stubbornness. She's got power of attorney. You know, if a doctor says you're not competent to manage your own affairs, you'd have me declared incompetent," I finished for him. "I'd do what's best for the family." There it was. The threat I'd been waiting for him to make out loud. I filed it away in my memory, adding it to the recording that the small device in my cardigan pocket was capturing with perfect clarity. "Let me think about it," I said finally, watching his face shift from frustration to satisfaction in the span of a second. "That's all I'm asking, Pops. Just think about it." He stood, adjusting his suit jacket. "But don't think too long. Opportunities like this don't wait for old men to make up their minds." He walked out of my house like he owned it, and I remained seated on my chair, my hands folded in my lap. When I heard his car pull away, I allowed myself a small smile, the kind Dorothy used to call my dangerous smile. Corey Hayes had no idea that the financial summary Monique had shown him was a carefully constructed fake, a decoy I had created with the help of my attorney, specifically to see how far he would go. He had no idea that the savings account he was so eager to drain was a monitored account with a deliberately low balance, set up specifically to track any unauthorized access attempts. And he certainly had no idea that my forensic accountant had already discovered something far worse than gambling. 3 days ago, Priscilla had called me with information that changed everything. Corey Hayes wasn't just a financial predator. He was wanted in 2 states for elder fraud. He'd done this before, to a retired bus driver in Memphis. to a widowed grandfather in Birmingham. He had a pattern, and my daughter was just his latest target. But this time, he'd chosen the wrong family. I picked up my phone and dialed the number I'd memorized weeks ago. My attorney, a sharp woman named Henrietta Bowles, answered on the second ring. "It's Bernard," I said. "He made the threat on recording, and he's planning to move on the decoy account soon. I think it's time to activate Phase 2. "Are you sure?" Henrietta asked. "Once we do this, there's no going back. Your daughter will learn everything." I thought about Monique, my beautiful, trusting daughter, who had fallen for this man's charm and couldn't see the snake underneath. She was going to be devastated. She was going to be angry, but she was also going to be free. "I'm sure," I said. "Then we move forward. I'll contact the district attorney's office about his prior cases. We'll need you to get him to access that account himself. If he uses Monique's credentials like we expect him to, we'll have federal wire fraud to add to the charges." "He'll do it," I said, certainty settling into my bones. "He's too arrogant not to." We ended the call, and I sat in the silence of my living room, surrounded by 43 years of memories with Dorothy. On the mantel was our wedding photo, faded now but still precious. Next to it was a picture of Monique as a little girl, grinning in her Sunday dress. Dorothy had made me promise, in those final months, that I would protect our daughter, that I would protect our legacy, that I would never let anyone take what we had built together. "I'm keeping that promise," I whispered to the empty room. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed with a notification from Meridian Trust's fraud alert system. Someone had attempted to log into the decoy account using Monique's credentials. The IP address had been flagged and logged. The attempt had been blocked, but not before capturing every digital fingerprint Corey Hayes had left behind. He had taken the bait. And now, as I stared at the evidence appearing on my screen in real time, I realized that this was no longer just about protecting my daughter or preserving my wife's legacy. This was about justice, for the bus driver in Memphis, for the grandfather in Birmingham, for every person this man had ever called old or poor or senile while he picked their pockets clean. My phone rang. It was Monique. "Daddy," she said, her voice trembling in a way I hadn't heard since she was a child. "Corey just got a call from someone claiming to be a federal investigator. He's locked himself in the bedroom and he's screaming at someone on the phone. Daddy, what's going on?" I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. "Baby girl," I said softly, "I need you to come to my house right now. And when you get here, I'm going to tell you a story about your mother, about our family's real legacy, and about the man you married." The line went silent for a long moment. "Daddy," Monique whispered, "you're scaring me." "Good," I replied, "because what I'm about to tell you is going to change everything you thought you knew, including about that $47 million your mother left behind." I heard her sharp intake of breath. 47, she repeated. But before she could finish the sentence, I heard a door slam in the background, then Corey's voice, loud and furious. "Who are you on the phone with? Is that your father? Give me that phone right now." And then the line went dead. The night Dorothy died, she held my hand and made me promise 3 things. First, that I would keep living, that I wouldn't let grief swallow me the way it had swallowed her brother after he lost his wife. Second, that I would protect Monique, our only child, our miracle baby who came to us when we'd given up hope of ever having children. And third, that I would never tell anyone about the money until I was absolutely certain it was safe to do so. "There are wolves out there, Bernard," she whispered, her voice thin as paper. "Wolves who can smell wealth the way sharks smell blood. Promise me you'll be careful." I promised. And for the first year after her passing, I kept those promises easily. I lived. I watched over Monique from a distance, respecting her independence while staying close enough to catch her if she fell. And I told no one about the $47 million sitting in the Meridian Trust account, protected by ironclad legal structures that Dorothy had spent years building with the best estate attorneys money could buy. Then Corey Hayes walked into our lives, and everything changed. I remember the first time Monique brought him to Sunday dinner. It was 14 months after Dorothy's funeral, and my daughter had finally started smiling again. She was 34 years old, a registered nurse at Grady Memorial, and she'd been single for 3 years after a broken engagement that had left her cautious about love. "Daddy." "This is Corey," she said, her eyes bright with that dangerous light that comes from new romance. "We met at a hospital fundraiser. He works in financial consulting." Corey was handsome in that polished way that always made me uneasy. Perfect teeth, expensive watch, a handshake that was just firm enough to seem confident without being aggressive. He called me "Sir" and complimented the collard greens and asked thoughtful questions about my years working as a facilities manager for the Atlanta public schools system. He was good. I'll give him that. He was very, very good. But I'd spent 40 years managing buildings and the people who worked in them. I'd learned to read character the way other men read newspapers, and something about Corey Hayes made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was the way his eyes moved when he thought no one was watching, the way they catalogued everything in my house, assigning value, calculating worth. It was the slight pause before each of his charming responses, as if he was selecting the perfect answer from a mental script. It was the questions he asked, always circling back to family, to legacy, to what Dorothy had left behind. "Your late wife must have been an incredible woman," he said, that first night, accepting a second helping of sweet potato pie. "Monique tells me she was some kind of engineer." "Computer scientist," I corrected. "She worked for a tech company in the 80s and 90s, helped develop some of the early networking protocols." "Fascinating," Corey said, and I watched his eyes flicker with something that looked almost like hunger. "That must have been quite lucrative, the tech industry back then." "We did all right," I said carefully. "Nothing fancy, just enough to be comfortable." The lie came easily. Dorothy and I had practiced it for years, ever since the patent licensing money had started flowing in. We drove modest cars. We lived in our same modest house. We shopped at the same grocery stores and attended the same church we'd been going to for 30 years. The only people who knew about our true wealth were our attorney, our accountant, and God. Corey smiled and nodded, apparently satisfied with my answer. But I saw the way his jaw tightened, just slightly, the way his fingers drummed once against his thigh. He wasn't satisfied at all. He was just patient. They were engaged within 4 months, married within 8. And the financial bleeding began almost immediately. The first request came 3 weeks after the wedding. Monique called me on a Tuesday evening, her voice carrying that particular tension I'd learned to recognize as marital stress. "Daddy, I need to ask you something, and I need you not to make a big deal about it." "What is it, baby girl?" "Corey's car broke down. The transmission is shot, and it's going to cost more to fix than the car is worth. He needs reliable transportation for work, and we were wondering if you could help us with a down payment on something new." I was quiet for a moment. "How much are we talking about?" $15,000. I know it's a lot, but he's got some big clients he's about to close, and once those deals come through, he'll pay you back with interest. He promised. $15,000. I could have written that check without blinking, I had more than 3,000 times that amount sitting in an account Monique didn't even know existed. But something told me to hesitate. Something told me to pay attention. "Let me think about it," I said. "I'll call you tomorrow." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing Dorothy's voice in my head. There are wolves out there, Bernard. Wolves who can smell wealth. In the morning, I called my attorney, Henrietta Bowles. She was a sharp woman in her 50s who had worked with Dorothy for over a decade, and she knew more about our financial situation than anyone else alive. "He's asking for money already," she said, her voice flat with disapproval. "They've been married less than a month." His car broke down. "Supposedly. Supposedly," she repeated. "Bernard, I don't like this. I didn't like him at the wedding, and I don't like him now. Something about that man sets off every alarm I have." "Mine too," I admitted. "But Monique loves him. And if I refuse, I'm the bad guy, the suspicious old father who can't let his daughter be happy." Henrietta was quiet for a long moment. "Give him the money," she finally said. "But make it a loan. Put it in writing, and start keeping records of everything. If this man is what I think he is, we're going to need a paper trail." I followed her advice. I gave Corey the $15,000 for his new car, a gleaming black Range Rover that cost twice what he'd claimed. He signed a promissory note agreeing to repay the loan within 12 months. He shook my hand and called me "Sir," and promised he would never forget my generosity. He never made a single payment. 2 months later, the second request came. This time it was $22,000 for medical bills. Corey had been hospitalized for what Monique described as a stress-related cardiac event. The insurance hadn't covered everything, and they were drowning in debt. I asked to see the bills. Corey provided documents that looked official enough. I wrote another check. I added another entry to the records Henrietta had told me to keep. Then came the third request, and the fourth, and the fifth. A business opportunity that required a $30,000 investment, a legal situation that needed $12,000 to resolve, a property tax issue that threatened their home. Each time the story was urgent. Each time the promise of repayment was sincere. Each time I watched my son-in-law's eyes and saw nothing but cold calculation behind his grateful smile. In 18 months, I gave Corey Hayes almost $90,000 from my visible accounts, the modest savings that matched the humble widower persona I had carefully cultivated. Each check was documented, each promise was recorded, and each time I watched my daughter sink deeper into a marriage that was slowly drowning her. But it wasn't just my money he was taking. That was what finally pushed me to act. It was a Sunday afternoon, about 3 months ago, when Monique came to visit while Corey was supposedly at a business meeting. She looked tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. There were shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. And when she hugged me, she held on just a little too long. "Baby girl," I said softly. "Talk to me." She pulled back and tried to smile, but it crumbled almost immediately. "I'm fine, Daddy. Just tired. Work has been crazy and—" Monique, my daughter's name, spoken in the tone that had ended every childhood lie she'd ever attempted. She looked at me, and her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what's happening," she whispered. "I had $32,000 in my savings account when we got married. Money I'd been putting away for years. And now it's all gone. Every time I check, there's less than there should be. Corey says it's just bills, just life expenses. But the numbers don't add up. And when I try to talk to him about it, he gets so angry. He says I don't understand finances. He says I should trust him. He says—" She stopped, pressing her hand to her mouth. What does he say? Baby? He says I'm lucky he married me at all, that no other man would put up with a woman who questions everything, that I should be grateful. There was that word again. Grateful. I felt something cold settle in my chest. The same cold I'd felt in Vietnam, 50 years ago, when I knew a firefight was coming, and there was nothing to do but prepare. I'd sworn I would never feel that coldness again. But here it was, awakened by a different kind of enemy. Monique, I said carefully, I want you to listen to me. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to answer them honestly. Can you do that? She nodded, wiping her eyes. Has Corey ever asked you about my finances, about what your mother left behind? All the time, she admitted. He says he's worried about you, that you're too old to be managing money on your own. He keeps saying we should set up a trust, put everything together, let him handle the investments. And what have you told him? I showed him the financial summary you gave me after Mama died. The one that showed the house and the savings account and the Social Security. He seemed satisfied with that. The financial summary. The decoy document I had created specifically for situations like this, showing assets that totaled less than $200,000, the fake breadcrumbs that led away from the real fortune. Has he ever asked about anything else? Any other accounts? Any other assets? Monique frowned. He asked once if Mama had any patents or intellectual property from her tech days. I told him I didn't know. Did she, Daddy? I looked at my daughter, this beautiful woman I had raised, this trusting soul who had married a predator without knowing what he was. I thought about the promise I had made to Dorothy. I thought about the wolves and the blood and the careful silence we had maintained for so long. No, baby, I lied. She didn't have anything like that. That night, after Monique went home, I called Henrietta Bowles. I need a private investigator, I said. Someone who specializes in financial crimes, someone discreet, someone who can find out exactly who Corey Hayes really is and what he's really after. I know just the person, Henrietta replied. Her name is Priscilla Morton. She's the best in the Southeast. But Bernard, if we go down this road, we need to be prepared for what we might find. I'm prepared, I said. And I was. Because by then, I had stopped seeing Corey Hayes as my daughter's husband. I had stopped hoping that I was wrong about him, that his charm was genuine, that his promises meant something. By then, I had recognized him for what he truly was, a wolf. And what Corey Hayes didn't understand, what he would never understand until it was far too late, was that Bernard Sutton was not the helpless old sheep he appeared to be. I was the shepherd, and shepherds don't run from wolves. They don't hide from wolves. They don't negotiate with wolves. They eliminate them. 3 days after hiring Priscilla Morton, I received her preliminary report. It contained 17 pages of documentation, including bank records, court filings, and interview transcripts. Corey Hayes had been married twice before. Both wives had been significantly older than him. Both had been financially comfortable when they married him. Both had been virtually bankrupt when the marriages ended. The first wife, a retired school teacher in Memphis, had lost her pension, her house, and her life savings. She was currently living in a subsidized apartment and working part-time at a grocery store at the age of 67. The second wife, a widowed grandmother in Birmingham, had lost even more. She had signed over power of attorney to Corey during what he claimed was a mental health crisis. By the time her children discovered what had happened, every asset she owned had been liquidated and transferred to accounts in Corey's name. He had vanished before charges could be filed. And now he was here, in Atlanta, married to my daughter, asking about trusts and financial planning and what Dorothy had really left behind. I set down the report and stared out my kitchen window at the setting sun. "You picked the wrong family," I said softly to the empty room. "You picked the wrong old man." The next morning, I called Henrietta and told her to begin preparing the trap. A decoy account with just enough money to be tempting. A fake financial summary that would make Corey believe he was close to the prize. Digital monitoring systems that would capture every keystroke, every login attempt, every piece of evidence we would need. It took 2 months to build. 2 months of playing the confused old widower. 2 months of pretending not to notice Corey's growing impatience, his increasingly bold questions, his thinly veiled threats. But now the trap was set. The bait was taken. And my phone had just gone dead with my daughter on the other end. Her husband's furious voice echoing in the background. I stood up from my chair, my old knees protesting the sudden movement, and reached for my car keys. It was time to go get my daughter. I drove faster than I had in years, my old Buick eating up the miles between my house in East Point and Monique's townhouse in Decatur. The whole way there, I kept hearing the sound of that phone going dead, the fury in Corey's voice, the fear in my daughter's. Dorothy's voice echoed in my memory. "Protect our daughter, Bernard. Promise me." I promised, baby. I promised. When I pulled onto Monique's street, I saw Corey's Range Rover still in the driveway. The lights were on inside the townhouse. No police cars, no ambulances. I exhaled slowly and parked across the street, taking a moment to collect myself before going in. I was 72 years old. My knees ached in the morning. My hands weren't as steady as they used to be. But I had survived Vietnam. I had survived 40 years of working in buildings where things broke and people complained and problems needed solving. I had survived losing the love of my life and keeping a secret fortune hidden from wolves for over a year. I could survive Corey Hayes. I walked up to the front door and knocked. 3 firm knocks, the kind that said I wasn't going anywhere until someone answered. The door swung open, and there was Corey, his face arranged in that charming smile that no longer fooled me for a second. But I could see the tension around his eyes, the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. He was rattled, and he was trying very hard not to show it. "Pops," he said, his voice smooth as butter. "What a surprise. Monique didn't tell me you were coming by." "That's because she didn't know," I replied. "We were on the phone when we got disconnected. I wanted to make sure everything was all right." Something flickered in his eyes. "Everything's fine. Just fine. Monique's a little tired. She went to lie down. Maybe you could come back tomorrow." "Daddy." Monique's voice came from behind him, and then she was pushing past Corey, wrapping her arms around me in the doorway. She was trembling. I could feel it through her blouse. "I'm here, baby girl," I said softly. "I'm right here." Corey watched us with those cold, calculating eyes, and I saw him making decisions in real time, trying to figure out how much I knew, trying to figure out how to play this. Finally, he stepped back and gestured for me to come inside. "Well, since you're here, you might as well come in. Can I get you something to drink?" "No," I said, keeping my arm around Monique's shoulders. "I'm just here to check on my daughter." "Monique, you want to come stay with me tonight? Just like old times." I felt her stiffen beside me, felt her glance at Corey, then back at me. That glance told me everything I needed to know about what their marriage had become. A woman shouldn't have to ask permission to visit her own father. "She's not going anywhere," Corey said, his voice still pleasant, but with an edge now. "We have things to discuss. Family business." "Family business?" I repeated. Interesting choice of words, coming from you. The room went very still. Corey's smile finally fell away, replaced by something harder, something more honest. What's that supposed to mean? I looked at him for a long moment. Looked at this man who had married my daughter under false pretenses, drained her accounts, and was now circling me like a vulture, waiting for the last breath. I thought about the evidence Priscilla had gathered, the recordings Henrietta was preparing, the trap that was already closing around him, and I smiled. It doesn't mean anything, I said mildly, just the ramblings of an old man. Come on, Monique, walk me to my car. Corey stepped forward. I said she's not. Son, I interrupted, my voice quiet, but carrying the weight of every year I'd lived. You're going to want to step back now, and you're going to let my daughter walk her father to his car, because if you put your hands on me or her, I promise you that what comes next will make your current problems look like a parking ticket. The silence stretched between us like a wire about to snap. Then Corey laughed, short and harsh. You really are senile, old man. But fine. Walk him to his car, Monique. Just don't be long. We still have things to talk about. Monique and I walked out together, her hand gripping mine like she was drowning, and I was the only solid thing left in her world. When we reached my car, out of earshot from the house, she finally spoke. Daddy, what is going on? Why did you say that about $47 million? And who called Corey? He's been acting crazy since that phone call. He keeps saying someone's trying to destroy him, that it's all lies, that... Monique, listen to me. I took both her hands in mine and looked into her eyes. I need you to trust me. Can you do that? The way you trusted me when you were a little girl and I told you everything was going to be all right? Tears spilled down her cheeks. Daddy, I'm scared. I know, baby, but I need you to stay calm. Stay in that house tonight. Act normal. Don't let him know you're suspicious. Can you do that for me? Just for 24 hours. Why? What happens in 24 hours? I squeezed her hands gently. Justice, baby girl. Justice happens. I drove home with my heart pounding and my mind racing. As soon as I walked through my front door, I called Priscilla Morton. He's unraveling, I said. The call from the federal investigator scared him, but he's also getting more dangerous. I could see it in his eyes. We need to move faster. Then it's a good thing I have news, Priscilla replied. My forensic accountant finished his deep dive this morning. Bernard, you need to sit down for this. I settled into my armchair, the same chair Dorothy used to sit in while she read her mystery novels. I'm sitting. Corey Hayes isn't just a financial predator. He's a full-blown criminal enterprise. We found 17 separate bank accounts in his name across 6 states. We found shell companies registered in Delaware and Nevada. We found a money trail that goes all the way to offshore accounts in the Caymans. I let out a slow breath. How much are we talking about? Combined, from his 2 previous marriages and various other schemes, approximately $4.2 million. All of it stolen from people who trusted him. And that's just what we can trace. $4.2 million. Taken from widows and retirees and people who thought they were loved. But here's the real smoking gun, Priscilla continued. 3 days ago, we got the alert that someone tried to access your decoy account using Monique's credentials. I traced the IP address, just like we planned. It came from a device registered to Corey Hayes. But that's not all. What else? When he couldn't get into the account directly, he got creative. He tried to initiate a wire transfer from Monique's personal savings to one of his shell companies. The bank flagged it as suspicious because the receiving account was on a federal watch list. A federal watch list? Turns out the FBI has had their eye on one of Corey's offshore connections for over a year. Money laundering investigation. When Corey tried to wire Monique's money to that particular account, he essentially handed them evidence of his involvement. I sat in stunned silence for a moment. This was bigger than I had imagined, bigger than a simple gold digger targeting vulnerable people. This was organized financial crime, and my daughter was married to the man at the center of it. "There's more," Priscilla said, "and this is the part that's going to hurt." "Tell me." "We've been monitoring Corey's communications since you authorized the investigation. He's been talking to someone, a woman in Savannah. From the messages, it's clear they have a romantic relationship, and it's also clear that she's involved in his schemes. He's cheating on my daughter. Worse than that. The woman in Savannah, her name is Loretta Vance. She was his first wife's home health care aide. According to our research, she's the one who helped Corey gain access to that woman's financial accounts in the first place. She's his partner, has been for at least 8 years. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of this information settle into my bones. Corey Hayes hadn't just married my daughter for her money or for access to me. He had a whole operation, a whole criminal enterprise designed to drain families of everything they had. And Monique was just the latest victim in a long line of broken lives. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Now we spring the trap," Priscilla said. "I've been in contact with Henrietta and with the FBI. They're very interested in Corey Hayes, interested enough to coordinate with local law enforcement for his arrest. But they want to catch him in the act of something big. Something undeniable." "The trust documents," I said, understanding dawning. "He's been pushing me to sign over control of my assets to a trust that he manages. If I pretend to agree, then he'll show up expecting to walk away with what he thinks is your entire estate. Instead, he'll walk into a room full of federal agents with recordings of him committing fraud, wire transfer evidence, and testimony from his previous victims who are very eager to see him face justice." I thought about it, thought about looking into Corey's eyes as he realized he had lost, thought about the moment when the handcuffs closed around his wrists. "When?" I asked. "Day after tomorrow, Friday morning. Henrietta is preparing a fake signing ceremony at her office. We'll have everything documented, everything recorded. Everything legal." "And Monique?" Priscilla was quiet for a moment. "That's going to be the hardest part. She needs to know the truth before this happens. She needs to understand what her husband really is, so she doesn't try to warn him or defend him. Can you do that? Can you tell her everything?" I looked at the wedding photo on my mantel. Dorothy and me, young and hopeful, standing on the steps of Greater Mount Olive Baptist Church with our whole lives ahead of us. Next to it was a photo of Monique at her own wedding, beaming beside Corey in his expensive suit. My daughter had trusted that man, loved that man, built a life with that man, and I was about to destroy all of it. "I can do it," I said, "but I'm going to need your help. Everything you have, every document, every recording, every piece of evidence. She needs to see it all. She needs to understand that I'm not doing this out of spite or jealousy. I'm doing this because it's the truth. I'll have a complete file delivered to your house by tomorrow morning," Priscilla promised. "Bernard, I know this is hard, but you're doing the right thing. That man has destroyed lives. He would have destroyed Monique's too, if you hadn't caught on to him." "Dorothy knew," I said quietly. "Somehow, she knew. She made me promise to protect our daughter from the wolves, and I'm going to keep that promise, no matter what it costs." After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of my living room for a long time. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles into a home after decades of love and laughter have seeped into the walls. Dorothy was everywhere here. In the color of the curtains she'd picked out, in the arrangement of the furniture she'd insisted on, in the faint smell of her perfume that I imagined I could still catch sometimes, late at night. "I found him out, baby," I whispered, "just like you knew I would. And I'm going to take him down, just like you would have wanted." The next morning, I woke early. By 8 o'clock, Priscilla's courier had delivered a thick manila envelope containing everything her investigation had uncovered. I spread the documents across my kitchen table and studied them again, memorizing the details, preparing myself for the conversation that was coming. At 9 o'clock, my doorbell rang. It was Monique. She looked like she hadn't slept. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she was still wearing the same clothes from the night before. "I told him I was going to the store," she said, stepping inside. "I only have about an hour before he starts calling. Daddy, please tell me what's happening. I can't take this anymore." I led her to the kitchen table. I sat her down in front of the evidence that would shatter her world. And then I began to talk. I told her about her mother's fortune, the patent licensing money, the accounts at Meridian Trust, the careful deception we had maintained for decades to protect ourselves from exactly the kind of predator she had married. I told her about hiring Priscilla Morton, about the forensic accountant, about Corey's previous marriages and the women he had destroyed. I told her about the gambling accounts and the shell companies and the offshore money, about Loretta Vance in Savannah, about the federal investigation and the trap we had set. Through it all, Monique sat in silence. Her face went through every emotion a human being could experience: shock, denial, anger, grief, and finally, a cold, hard acceptance that settled over her features like a mask. When I finished, she picked up one of the documents, a bank statement showing a transfer from her personal account to one of Corey's shell companies. $23,000, moved without her knowledge or consent. "He stole from me," she said, her voice flat. "He looked me in the eyes every morning and told me he loved me, and he was stealing from me the whole time. Yes, baby, he was. And this woman in Savannah. They've been together for 8 years. According to Priscilla's investigation, yes." Monique set down the document. Her hands were trembling, but her eyes were dry now, dry and hard and burning with a fury that reminded me so much of her mother that my heart clenched. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. "I need you to go home. Act normal for one more day, and tomorrow morning I need you to bring Corey to Henrietta's office for the trust signing. Tell him I finally agreed. Tell him he won. And then?" I reached across the table and took my daughter's hands in mine, and then we watched him fall. Monique held my gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded once, slowly, and I saw something shift behind her eyes. The trusting wife was gone. In her place was someone harder, someone wounded, someone ready for war. "One more day," she said. "One more day." She stood up to leave, but paused at the door, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Daddy, when this is over, when he's gone, will you finally tell me the truth about everything? About Mama's money? About why you hid it from me all these years?" I nodded. "Everything, baby girl. I'll tell you everything." She left, and I watched through the window as she drove away, back to the house she shared with a monster, armed with knowledge that would burn everything down. Tomorrow, this would all be over. Tomorrow, Corey Hayes would learn what happened when you tried to rob Bernard Sutton. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't possibly have anticipated, was that Corey had secrets of his own. Secrets that Priscilla's investigation had only scratched the surface of. And by this time tomorrow, those secrets would explode in ways none of us were prepared for. Friday morning arrived with the kind of grey Atlanta sky that promised rain by afternoon. I stood at my bedroom window, watching the clouds gather, and thought about everything that had led to this moment. 43 years of marriage, 18 months of watching a predator circle my family, 3 months of investigation, thousands of dollars in legal fees and forensic accounting, all of it building toward today. I put on my best suit, the charcoal grey one Dorothy had bought me for our 40th anniversary. She always said I looked distinguished in it, like a man who had earned his years instead of just surviving them. I knotted my tie carefully, the way my father had taught me back in 1965, when I was just a scared kid about to ship out to a war I didn't understand. "Courage isn't the absence of fear," my father had said, his thick fingers guiding mine through the Windsor knot. "Courage is being afraid and doing what needs to be done anyway." I was afraid. I won't pretend otherwise. Not of Corey Hayes himself, but of what today might do to my daughter. Of the wounds she would carry for years after this was over. Of the trust she might never fully recover. But some things needed to be done. At 8:30, my phone buzzed with a text from Monique. "We're leaving in 20 minutes. He thinks he's getting everything today. He actually smiled at me this morning, Daddy, like I was a prize he'd finally won." I typed back, "Stay strong, baby girl. Almost over." At 8:45, Priscilla Morton called. "Everyone's in position," she said. "FBI agents are in the conference room adjacent to Henrietta's office. Local police are staged outside. We've got recording equipment in every corner. The moment he attempts to execute those fraudulent trust documents, we've got him." And his partner, the woman in Savannah. Loretta Vance was picked up by federal marshals about an hour ago. She's currently sitting in an interview room being offered a deal in exchange for her testimony. My guess is she'll flip on Corey before lunch. Good. Bernard, one more thing. We did some additional digging into Corey's background last night. Something came up that I need to tell you about before this goes down. I felt a chill run down my spine. What is it? Corey Hayes isn't his real name. It's an identity he assumed about 12 years ago after leaving Virginia under complicated circumstances. His real name is Carlton Briggs. And Carlton Briggs has a warrant out for his arrest in connection with the death of an elderly man in Richmond. I sat down heavily on the edge of my bed. Death. The man was 78 years old, wealthy widower. Carlton Briggs married his daughter, just like he married Monique. When the father started asking too many questions about his finances, he had a fatal fall down a flight of stairs. It was ruled an accident, but the family never believed it. They've been pushing for the case to be reopened for years. My blood ran cold. I thought about all the times I'd been alone with Corey, all the times he'd looked at me with those calculating eyes. Had he been measuring me for a coffin even then? Does Monique know? Not yet. I didn't want to put that on her until we had him in custody. But Bernard, you need to be careful today. If Corey realizes the trap is closing, there's no telling what he might do. I understand. I hung up the phone and sat in silence for a long moment. Then I opened my nightstand drawer and looked at the object inside. Dorothy's father's old service revolver, unloaded for decades but still heavy with memory and meaning. I closed the drawer without touching it. That wasn't who I was. That wasn't how this would end. I would take down Corey Hayes with paper and patience, the way Dorothy would have wanted, the way justice demanded. By 9:30, I was seated in Henrietta Bowles's conference room, a stack of official-looking documents spread across the mahogany table in front of me. The documents were elaborate fakes, prepared by Henrietta's team to look exactly like the trust transfer papers Corey had been pushing for. They contained language that would supposedly give him control over my entire estate, including the decoy accounts he believed represented my life savings. In reality, they were legal poison pills designed to capture his signature on fraudulent documents and provide irrefutable evidence of his intent to commit financial crimes. Henrietta sat beside me, her face calm, but her eyes alert. Through the wall, I knew federal agents were watching and listening, waiting for the moment to move. At 9:47, the conference room door opened, and Corey Hayes walked in with my daughter on his arm. He was wearing his most expensive suit. His smile was wider than I'd ever seen it. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery, and in his mind, I suppose he had. The pathetic old widower had finally caved. The fortune he'd been circling for 18 months was about to be his. "Pops!" he exclaimed, releasing Monique to stride toward me with his hand extended. "This is a big day, a really big day. I'm so proud of you for making this decision. Dorothy would be proud too." I didn't take his hand. I just looked at him, keeping my face neutral, my eyes steady. "Sit down, Corey. Let's get this done." Something flickered across his face. Confusion, maybe. Or suspicion. But greed is a powerful thing, and it quickly smoothed over any doubts he might have had. He pulled out a chair and settled into it, Monique taking the seat beside him. My daughter's face was a mask. I could see the effort it took for her to sit next to this man, to touch him, to pretend that everything was normal, but she held it together. She held it together because she was Dorothy's daughter, and Dorothy's daughter was stronger than anyone gave her credit for. Henrietta slid the documents across the table. "Mr. Hayes, these are the trust transfer papers you requested. They designate you as the primary trustee of Mr. Sutton's estate, with full discretionary control over all assets. Before we proceed, I need to confirm that you understand what you're signing." "Oh, I understand," Corey said, already reaching for a pen. "I understand perfectly." "Then please initial each page and sign at the bottom of the final document." I watched him flip through the pages, his eyes scanning the legal language with practiced efficiency. He didn't read carefully. He didn't ask questions. He was too eager, too hungry, too certain that he had already won. When he reached the final page, he signed his name with a flourish. Corey Hayes, written in bold, confident strokes, the signature of a man who had just sealed his own fate. Henrietta collected the documents and set them aside. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Now, before we finalize this arrangement, there are a few additional items we need to discuss." Corey's smile faltered slightly. "Additional items? What are you talking about?" I signed the papers. "The money's mine now." "Actually," I said, speaking for the first time since he'd entered the room, "it's not. And it never will be." Corey's head snapped toward me. "What?" I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. "You see those documents you just signed? They're not real trust transfer papers. They're a carefully constructed legal trap, designed to capture evidence of your intent to defraud me. This is insane. You're senile." "Monique, tell your father, but that's not the only evidence we have," I continued, my voice calm and even. "We also have recordings of you threatening to have me declared incompetent. We have bank records showing you transferred $17,000 of Monique's money to a private gambling account. We have documentation of your 2 previous marriages and the women you destroyed. We have wire transfer records linking you to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, and we have testimony from your partner, Loretta Vance, who was arrested this morning and is currently telling federal investigators everything she knows about your operation." Corey's face went pale. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked genuinely afraid. "You're lying. You don't have any of that. You're just a broke old man who doesn't know anything about. We also know your real name," I said quietly. "Carlton Briggs, wanted in Virginia in connection with the death of Raymond Foster, age 78. A wealthy widower whose daughter you married before he conveniently fell down a flight of stairs." The room went absolutely silent. Corey's eyes darted to Monique, then to Henrietta, then to the door. I could see him calculating his options, measuring distances, planning escape routes. "Monique," he said, his voice suddenly soft and pleading. "Baby, you know me. You know I would never hurt anyone. This is all a misunderstanding. Your father is confused. He's old and paranoid and—" "Don't!" Monique's voice was ice. "Don't you dare call him old. Don't you dare call him confused. The only confused person in this room is me, because I spent 18 months believing your lies. Baby, please! I'm not your baby. I'm not your wife. I'm not your victim." Monique stood up, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I'm Bernard Sutton's daughter, and you picked the wrong family to mess with." Corey's face twisted. The charming mask fell away completely, replaced by something ugly and desperate. He lunged to his feet, grabbing Monique's arm. "You ungrateful little—" The conference room door burst open. 4 federal agents in tactical vests poured through, weapons drawn. "Carlton Briggs, FBI! Get on the ground! Hands behind your head! Now!" For one terrible moment, Corey's grip tightened on Monique's arm. I saw the calculation in his eyes, the desperation of a cornered animal. I started to rise from my chair, ready to throw my 72-year-old body between this monster and my daughter if I had to. But Monique moved first. With a swift motion she'd probably learned in some self-defense class I never knew she'd taken, she twisted her arm free and stepped back, putting distance between herself and the man she'd called husband. "It's over, Corey," she said. "It's finally over." The agents swarmed him. He struggled at first, shouting and cursing, calling me every name he could think of. Senile old fool. Pathetic old man. Worthless broke nobody who didn't know his place. I sat in my chair and watched him thrash. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't need to, because I had already won. When the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, when the agent started reading him his rights, when his voice finally went hoarse from screaming, I allowed myself to smile. That small, quiet, dangerous smile that Dorothy had loved so much. Corey saw it. Even as they dragged him toward the door, he saw that smile. And for one beautiful moment, I watched understanding dawn in his eyes. He had never been the predator. He had never been in control. From the very beginning, from the moment he walked into my life, with his expensive suits and his charming lies, he had been walking into a trap laid by a patient man with a long memory and a promise to keep. "You think this is over?" he shouted as they pulled him through the doorway. "You think you've won? I've got people. I've got connections. I'll be out by Monday, and when I am—" "Mr. Briggs," one of the agents said calmly, "you're facing federal wire fraud charges, money laundering charges, and you're being extradited to Virginia to face questioning in a suspicious death investigation. You're not going anywhere for a very long time." The door closed behind them, cutting off Corey's final screams, and then it was quiet. Monique stood in the middle of the conference room, her arms wrapped around herself, her whole body trembling. I went to her, my old bones protesting as I moved, and pulled her into my arms the way I had when she was a little girl afraid of thunderstorms. "It's over, baby," I whispered. "He can't hurt you anymore." She clung to me, and I felt her tears soaking through my suit jacket, the charcoal grey suit Dorothy had bought me for our anniversary. the suit I'd worn to take down the man who tried to destroy our family. "I'm sorry, Daddy," Monique sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I should have listened. I should have seen what he was. I should have—" "Shh. None of that matters now. What matters is that you're safe. What matters is that we're together. What matters is that your mother's legacy is protected, and that monster is going to prison for a very long time." Henrietta approached us quietly, giving Monique a moment to compose herself before speaking. "Bernard, the FBI wants to take your formal statement. But after that, I think there's something you need to tell your daughter. Something you've been keeping from her for a very long time." I looked at Monique, at her tear-streaked face and her red-rimmed eyes, and the strength I could see gathering in her expression even now. "Yes," I said. "I think it's time she knew everything." We walked out of Henrietta's office into the grey Atlanta morning. The rain had started, soft and steady, washing the city clean. Police cars still lined the street, their lights flashing blue and red through the mist. And somewhere in the back of one of those cars, handcuffed and defeated, sat the man who had thought he could destroy us. I put my arm around my daughter and led her toward my car. "Come on, baby girl," I said. "Let's go home. We've got a lot to talk about." What I didn't tell her, what I couldn't tell her yet, was that the nightmare wasn't quite over. The FBI had found something else in their investigation of Corey's past, something that connected him to a network of financial predators operating across the Southeast. Something that suggested he wasn't just a lone wolf, but part of a pack. And that pack was about to learn that Bernard Sutton wasn't prey. He was the hunter. 6 months later, I stood on the balcony of an oceanfront villa in Cape Town, South Africa, watching the sun sink into the Atlantic Ocean. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple that no photograph could ever capture, and the air smelled of salt and jasmine and freedom. Dorothy had always wanted to see Africa. We'd planned the trip a dozen times over the years, always putting it off for one reason or another. Work obligations, family responsibilities, the careful maintenance of our modest facade. There was always something that kept us tethered to Atlanta, always some reason to postpone our dreams for another year. But Dorothy was gone now. The secrets we'd kept together were finally revealed. And I was 72 years old with more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes, and a daughter who had survived the worst kind of betrayal. It was time to start living. "Daddy, you need to see this." Monique's voice floated through the open balcony doors. She was curled up on the leather sofa in the villa's living room, her laptop open on her lap. In the months since Corey's arrest, she had transformed in ways that still amazed me. The haunted look was gone from her eyes. The tension had melted from her shoulders. She laughed again, freely and often, the way she had before that man came into her life. I walked inside and settled into the chair across from her. "What is it?" "The sentencing came through. It's all over the news." She turned the laptop toward me. "Carlton Briggs, also known as Corey Hayes, was sentenced today to 47 years in federal prison on charges including wire fraud, money laundering, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes against elderly victims. He's also been charged in Virginia with second-degree murder in the death of Raymond Foster, with that trial scheduled for next spring." 47 years. The same number, almost to the dollar, as the millions Dorothy had left behind. I didn't believe in coincidences, but I believed in justice, and sometimes justice had a sense of poetry. "There's more," Monique said. Loretta Vance testified against him in exchange for a reduced sentence. She gave up everything: names, accounts, methods. The FBI used her information to take down 11 other financial predators connected to his network. They're calling it the largest elder fraud prosecution in Georgia history. I thought about those 11 other predators. Thought about the families they might have destroyed if they'd been allowed to continue. Thought about the widows and widowers and retirees who would sleep safer now because a quiet old man in East Point had decided to fight back. "How do you feel?" I asked my daughter. Monique closed the laptop and was quiet for a long moment. "I feel free. For the first time since I met him, I feel like I can breathe, like I can think clearly, like I can trust myself again." She paused. "Is that strange? To feel relieved that the man I married is going to spend the rest of his life in prison? No, baby girl, that's not strange at all. That's survival." She nodded slowly. Then a small smile crossed her face. "The article also mentions that his assets have been seized and are being distributed to his victims. That retired school teacher in Memphis? She's getting her pension back. The grandmother in Birmingham? Her children are receiving compensation for everything their mother lost." "Good," I said. "That's good." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the last light fade from the African sky. The villa was a rental, obscenely expensive by any normal standard, but a drop in the bucket compared to what Dorothy had left us. We'd been traveling for 3 months now, working our way down the continent. Morocco first, then Senegal, then Ghana to visit the slave castles and pay our respects to the ancestors. Now South Africa, with plans for Kenya and Tanzania before we finally returned home. Home. I still thought of the little house in East Point that way, even though Henrietta had been gently suggesting that I might want to consider something larger, something befitting a man of my actual means. But that house held 43 years of memories. That house was where Dorothy and I had built our life together. That house was where I'd raised my daughter and buried my wife and taken down a predator who thought I was just a helpless old man. I wasn't ready to leave it. Maybe I never would be. "Daddy," Monique said, interrupting my thoughts. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything, baby." "Why didn't you tell me? About the money, I mean. All those years, watching me struggle with student loans and car payments and saving for a house. You could have made all of that disappear with a single check." "Why did you let me struggle?" It was a fair question, one I'd been expecting since the day I finally told her the truth about her mother's fortune. I'd rehearsed my answer 100 times, but now that the moment was here, the rehearsed words seemed hollow. "Because your mother made me promise," I said finally, "and because she was right to make me promise. Dorothy always said that money was like blood in the water. It attracts sharks, and she wanted you to build your own life, develop your own strength before you ever had to deal with that kind of attention. But I married a shark anyway. You did, and you survived him, and now you know what they look like, how they move, how they think. That knowledge is worth more than money, Monique. That knowledge will protect you for the rest of your life." Monique considered this. Mama was smart. Smartest woman I ever knew, present company included. She threw a pillow at me, and I caught it with a laugh that felt strange in my chest. I hadn't laughed much in the year after Dorothy died, hadn't seen much reason to, but here, on the other side of the world, with my daughter healthy and whole, and the monster who'd hurt her, locked away forever, laughter came easily again. We had dinner that night at a restaurant overlooking the harbour. Fresh seafood and South African wine, and a table with a view of the water. Monique asked me questions about her mother that I'd never answered before, about the early days of their tech company, about the negotiations that led to the patent licensing deal, about the careful, patient work of building a fortune while pretending to have nothing. I told her everything. every secret Dorothy and I had kept for decades, every decision we'd made to protect our family from the wolves, every sacrifice, every deception, every moment of quiet triumph that no one else would ever know about. By the time dessert arrived, Monique was crying again. But these were different tears, tears of understanding, tears of connection to a mother she'd lost too soon, tears of finally knowing the whole truth. "She would be so proud of you," Monique said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "For what you did, for how you protected me, for the way you took him down without ever raising your voice or losing your dignity. She would be proud of you too, baby girl, for surviving, for helping spring the trap, for walking away from that man with your head held high." "What happens now?" Monique asked. "When we go home, I mean. What do we do with all of it? The money, the legacy, everything Mama built." I'd been thinking about that question for months, ever since the handcuffs closed around Corey's wrists and the FBI started unraveling his network. I'd had plenty of time to consider what Dorothy would have wanted, what our family owed to the world, what purpose all that wealth could serve. "We do what your mother always planned to do," I said. "We use it to help people. We set up a foundation in her name. We fund scholarships for young women in STEM. We support programs that educate seniors about financial predators. We take what Corey tried to steal and turn it into something that heals instead of hurts." Monique's eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. "The Dorothy Sutton Foundation. That's exactly what I was thinking. And the rest of it? The investment accounts? The property holdings? All of that? That's your inheritance, baby girl. Yours to manage, yours to grow, yours to protect for your own children someday. Henrietta's been working with a team of wealth managers to structure everything properly. By the time we get home, you'll have access to resources that would make Corey Hayes weep with envy." Monique laughed at that. A real laugh, bright and clear and full of life. "I hope he does weep. I hope he spends every day of those 47 years thinking about what he could have had if he'd just been a decent human being." "He will," I said. "Men like him always do." We flew home 2 weeks later, first class on a direct flight from Johannesburg to Atlanta. I'd never flown first class before in my life, despite having the means to do so for decades. Dorothy and I had always chosen coach, maintaining our careful facade even when no one was watching. But that pretense was over now. The secret was out. The wolves had been beaten. It was time to enjoy what we'd built. The house in East Point looked the same as it always had when we pulled up in the ride-share from the airport. Same modest front yard, same 10-year-old Buick in the driveway, though Monique kept insisting I should let her buy me something newer. Same porch where Dorothy and I had sat on summer evenings, watching the neighborhood children play. But everything was different now. The weight I'd been carrying since Dorothy's death. The constant vigilance against the wolves. The lonely burden of secrets kept too long, all of it had lifted. In its place was something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. I walked through the front door and breathed in the familiar scent of home. Henrietta had arranged for a cleaning service to maintain the house while we were traveling, and everything was spotless. On the mantel, Dorothy's photo smiled at me, frozen forever in the moment of our 40th anniversary. "We did it, baby," I whispered to her image. "We protected our girl. We took down the wolf. And now we're going to build something beautiful with everything you left behind." Monique came in behind me, carrying her suitcase. She paused next to me, looking at her mother's photo. "I dream about her sometimes," she said softly. "Since Corey's arrest, I mean. In the dreams, she's always smiling. always telling me she's proud of me, always telling me to take care of you. I put my arm around my daughter's shoulders. She would say that. Stubborn woman never could stop looking out for other people, even from the grave. "Daddy, there's something I need to tell you." I looked at her, seeing something new in her expression, something I couldn't quite identify. "What is it?" "I'm going back to nursing, full-time. I took a leave of absence when everything happened with Corey, but I've decided to go back. Not because I need the money, obviously, but because it's who I am. It's what I love, and I don't want Mama's money to change that about me." Pride swelled in my chest, so strong it almost hurt. That's exactly what your mother would have wanted. She always said the money was a tool, not an identity. That who you are matters more than what you have. I learned from the best, Monique said. Both of you. That night, after Monique had gone to her old bedroom to sleep off the jet lag, I sat in my armchair in the living room. The house was quiet. The neighborhood was quiet. The whole world seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for whatever came next. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the news articles about Corey's sentencing. 47 years. His mugshot stared out from every headline, his handsome face now haggard and desperate. The charming smile that had fooled my daughter was nowhere to be seen. In its place was the hollow expression of a man who had finally been caught. I thought about all the people he'd hurt, the retired school teacher in Memphis who was getting her pension back, the grandmother in Birmingham whose children would finally see justice, the network of 11 other predators who were now facing their own trials, their own sentences, their own reckonings. I thought about Dorothy, who had seen the wolves coming before anyone else, who had built walls of money and secrecy to protect our family, who had made me promise to keep those walls standing until the danger had passed. And I thought about myself. Bernard Sutton, 72 years old, veteran and father and widower and millionaire. A quiet man who had played a long game against a dangerous enemy and won. The smart patriarch, they might call me, if anyone ever told this story. But I knew the truth. I wasn't smart. I was patient. I was careful. I was willing to play the fool while I gathered evidence and set traps and waited for my enemy to make a mistake. And when that enemy finally fell, I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I just smiled that quiet smile Dorothy had loved so much and got on with the business of living, because that's what survivors do. We endure. We adapt. We protect our own. And when the wolves come hunting, we remind them that some sheep have teeth. I set down my phone and closed my eyes, letting the peace of home wash over me. Tomorrow, I would call Henrietta and start the paperwork for the Dorothy Sutton Foundation. Tomorrow, I would begin the work of turning our fortune into something that helped people instead of hiding from them. But tonight, I would rest. Tonight, I would remember my wife and cherish my daughter and be grateful for everything I had. And somewhere in a federal prison in Virginia, Corey Hayes would be spending his first night of 47 years behind bars, learning what it meant to underestimate a patient old man. Justice, Dorothy had always said, doesn't shout. It whispers. It waits. And when it finally arrives, it lasts forever. She was right. She was always right. And now, at last, I could finally tell her so.